My name is Elena, and at 34, I should have known fairness is a luxury the Sterling family doesn't afford. Yet I watched the hope drain from my 8-year-old daughter, Aria's face, as every other child's name was called on Christmas, while hers was met with silence. They didn't know that inside my husband's jacket rested an envelope, holding a truth that could burn their legacy to the ground. An hour earlier, I'd hoped Aria's award-winning painting would finally move them. But after the last gift was given, my mother-in-law, Catherine, delivered the killing blow, her voice sweet as poison. Oh, it must be a mix-up. Besides, it's not as if she had any notable achievements this year for us to make a special note of, is it? Her words stole the air from my lungs. I saw my daughter's small shoulders tremble. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by your own family, you know this feeling. Comment where you're watching from and subscribe. You will want to see the moment that envelope came out and left this room of powerful people speechless. An hour before that fatal moment, as we drove through the winding roads of the Hudson Valley, I had allowed myself a sliver of hope. I had told myself this year would be different. In a small, carefully wrapped box on the back seat sat Aria's proof, a first-place ribbon from a citywide youth art competition. She had meticulously wrapped her award-winning watercolor, a vibrant landscape, with the pure, innocent belief that her talent could finally bridge the chasm between me and her grandparents. I had squeezed Liam's hand. He'd whispered, "Give them a chance, Elena." But my hope began to curdle the moment our modest sedan pulled into the circular driveway, a minnow in a sea of Bentleys and Porsches. The history of quiet injustice always finds a way to repeat itself. As we entered the grand foyer, I tried to breathe in the scent of the 15-foot Fraser fir, decorated with hand-blown German glass ornaments that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Everything at Riverwood screamed perfection and wealth, from the original Rothko painting on the wall to the antique Persian rug that swallowed my footsteps. But to me, it felt like a cold, sterile museum. I stood there in my teal wool dress, one I'd saved up for, feeling like a modest painting mistakenly hung in the Metropolitan. My mother-in-law, Catherine, swept her gaze over me. There was no compliment, only the faintest, almost imperceptible lift of her lips, enough for me to understand that in her eyes I was still just the girl from Oregon. Liam squeezed my hand, a gesture of comfort, but his grip was too loose, as if he feared being tainted by my ordinariness. Liam's sister, Isabel, glided over, her sequined dress shimmering. "Elena, still at that public school?" she asked, her smile a practiced facade. "It's so admirable you're still committed to your passion." The word passion was coded in condescension. My Charlotte was just accepted to the equestrian camp in the Hamptons. It's crucial for children to associate with their own kind early on, you know. Every word was a needle prick, implying my daughter was already falling behind in a race I never knew we were in. I just smiled, a stiff, brittle thing, as my father-in-law Preston walked past, clapping Liam on the shoulder and ignoring my existence as if I were a piece of furniture. The banquet table was as long as a highway, draped in Egyptian cotton and adorned with imported white roses. My name card was placed at the far end, next to one of Preston's German business partners, who spoke only of the stock market. Aria was relegated to the children's table in a corner, an isolated island. I watched my small, lonely daughter struggle to cut her oversized piece of roast turkey. I wanted to sit with her, but I knew it would cause a scandal in Catherine's perfect world. Liam, seated beside his father, occasionally glanced my way with an apologetic look, but he did nothing. He chose silence again. His silence screamed that in the war between his family and me, I would always be the one to lose. After a dessert of a towering red velvet cake from a famed New York City bakery, Preston stood. He raised his glass of Louis XVIII cognac and began his toast, praising his grandsons for their sailing trophies, his other granddaughters for their piano recitals. Arya's name was never mentioned. My heart sank. But the worst was yet to come. Catherine, with the grace of a queen, rose to speak. She lifted her champagne flute, her diamond bracelet catching the light. She smiled at the room before her eyes, like chips of ice, settled on Arya and me. "Let us toast to the grandchildren who will bring honor to the sterling name," she said, her voice like crystal. She paused, a dramatic, chilling beat. "Of course, not all of them are destined for such things." Her gaze flickered to Arya, a glance that lasted only a second but carried a decade of contempt. The room fell silent. It wasn't an oversight. It was a verdict. An icy chill shot down my spine. The world seemed to spin. A low buzzing started in my ears, the sound of my own humiliation. I looked to Liam, my only ally. He was on his feet, his face flushed with impotent anger, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. He stared at his mother, furious, but he said nothing. He didn't defend his daughter. He didn't defend me. His silence was the final betrayal, the last drop in a cup of bitterness that had overflowed for 10 years. I looked down at my daughter. Arya wasn't crying. She just looked up at me. Her big, clear eyes filled with a profound, shattering confusion, as if to ask, "Mommy, what did I do wrong?" And that look, that single silent question from my child, killed the last shred of hope I had for this family. It was in that moment I knew everything had to end. I couldn't look away from my daughter. Arya's wide, clear eyes were no longer shining with Christmas hope. They were now deep pools of a confusion an 8-year-old should never have to carry. The silent question in them, "Mommy, what did I do wrong?" was a drill boring straight into my heart. Because it was the very same question that had haunted me for 10 years, a ghost in the gilded hallways of the Sterling dynasty. I looked at my daughter and saw a reflection of my younger self, a person who always tried her best, who offered unconditional love, only to be met with a chilling silence or criticism wrapped in glossy paper. Tonight was no mistake. It was a message, repeated and refined over a decade. And as the memories flooded back, a torrent I could no longer hold back, I realized the map of scars on my soul had been drawn meticulously by their hands. 10 years ago, Liam brought me to this estate for the first time. I was 24, an art student from Portland, wearing the prettiest floral dress I owned, a gift from my mother. My palms were damp with nervous sweat. Catherine Sterling met us at the door, draped in an ivory silk pantsuit that radiated an intimidating power. She surveyed me from head to toe, her eyes sharp like an art appraiser inspecting a forgery. Then she smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes, and said, "Hello, Liam has told me so much about you. You have a very original beauty." In her world, original wasn't a compliment. It was a euphemism for unrefined, unpolished. It was the first time I understood that to her I wasn't a person. I was a project to be renovated, a canvas to be reframed, to match the rest of the Sterling collection. Our wedding wasn't the society event Catherine had envisioned. Instead of a lavish affair at the Plaza Hotel, we had an intimate ceremony in a botanical garden. My wedding gift to Liam was a portrait I had painted of him, a labor of love that took me 3 months to complete. It was my heart, my talent, everything I was on a canvas. When I presented it to Catherine and Preston, hoping it might hang in their home as a symbol of our union, Catherine merely glanced at it. "Thank you, Elena," she said, her voice flat. "It's very sentimental. We'll find a suitable place for it." That suitable place turned out to be the basement storage room. I found it by accident months later while looking for Christmas decorations, covered in a thin layer of dust, leaning against a damp wall. My talent, my love, had been discarded like an unfashionable piece of furniture. When Aria was born, I hoped a grandchild might finally thaw their frozen hearts. But 6 months later, Isabel gave birth to a son, Alexander, and any flicker of warmth toward Aria was extinguished. All attention immediately shifted to the next male heir. Catherine threw a lavish christening for Alexander at St. Patrick's Cathedral, while Aria's was a small, quiet affair in a local parish. As Aria was babbling her first words, Alexander had a private French tutor. As Aria was making her first crayon scribbles, Alexander was having his first piano lessons. I remember one family dinner, Preston held up Alexander and boomed, "Now this is true Sterling blood, strong and decisive." Then he glanced over at Aria, who was sitting quietly in my lap, and added in a lower voice, "Some are just more sensitive." The favoritism was never hidden. It was displayed as a matter of fact, a law of their universe. The pattern repeated itself, cruelly and consistently. For Preston's 60th birthday last year, Aria spent a week drawing a detailed picture of him with his beloved hunting dog. She used her entire allowance to buy an oak frame. With trembling hands and a proud heart, she presented it to him. Preston took it, gave a curt nod, and said, "All right, thank you." He then placed it on a side table, where it was promptly forgotten for the rest of the evening. At the end of the night, a caterer, clearing away debris, nearly swept it into a trash bag with the used paper plates. I had to physically intervene. I told Aria that Grandpa was just very busy and had forgotten. But I knew the truth. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was contempt. They weren't just devaluing me anymore. They were actively teaching my daughter that her love, her effort, her very essence was worthless. History was repeating itself in the most painful way possible. The memories broke over me, merging with the fresh pain of the present. I looked around the magnificent room, at the smug, self-satisfied faces of the Sterling clan. I had been so naive, thinking I could earn my way into their hearts with love and patience. They never wanted a daughter-in-law. They wanted a clone. They didn't want an artistic granddaughter. They wanted another trophy for their shelf. And I, with my decade of quiet endurance, had let them do it. I had allowed them to draw this map of scars, but tonight, looking at the broken trust in my daughter's eyes, I knew I could no longer be silent. My silence had cost the person I loved most dearly a piece of her soul. This map needed to be redrawn, and it would be redrawn with fire. My vow to redraw the map of my life with fire didn't begin with a grand explosion. It began with a quiet spark in the dead of night. The morning after that fateful Christmas, while the Sterling estate slept soundly, cocooned in its wealth and post-party stupor, I sat in the guest room with my laptop. The tears were gone, cried out. In their place was a cold, hard clarity. I opened a new browser tab, navigated to my bank's website, and opened a new savings account. An account in my name, and my name alone. I transferred the first $50 into it from my teacher's salary. The number was so small compared to the Sterling fortune that it was almost laughable. But to me, it was the first brick laid in the foundation of my own life. It was my private declaration of independence. It was the first flame, tiny but real, and I vowed to use everything I had to keep it from ever going out. My art teacher's salary was enough for small personal expenses, but not for building a future. I needed more. I remembered my old passion for pottery from my college days in Oregon. A quick search led me to a communal pottery studio in a dusty industrial corner of Brooklyn. It was gritty and unglamorous, but it pulsed with a raw, creative energy that felt more real than anything at Riverwood. 3 nights a week, after Aria was sound asleep, I would make the hour-long drive into the city. I'd work until midnight, my hands caked with clay, my back aching with a fatigue that settled deep in my bones, but my mind felt strangely peaceful. I threw mugs, bowls, and vases on the wheel. At first, they were misshapen and clumsy, but slowly, with practice, they found their form. Each piece I sold on Etsy was a small private victory. I remembered Catherine once derisively calling my art the poor teacher's messy hobby. She had no idea that this mess was rebuilding my self-worth, piece by painful piece. I knew I couldn't give Aria the trips to the Hamptons or the designer dresses her cousins flaunted, so I decided to give her something money couldn't buy. A world rich with culture and art. Every weekend, instead of trips to exclusive country clubs, we became explorers in our own city. We wandered the halls of the Met, MoMA, and the Guggenheim. I taught her about Van Gogh's swirling stars, Picasso's broken perspectives, and Frida Kahlo's unapologetic pain. We spent hours in dusty second-hand bookstores, discovering worlds the Sterlings would never bother to read about. I enrolled her in a local art class, a small, vibrant studio where she was just Aria, not a Sterling, and where her talent was nurtured, not judged. When Isabel would boast about her daughter getting a pony, I would just smile, thinking about how Aria's painting had just been selected for display at the local city library. We may have been poor in their eyes, but in our own quiet way, we were wealthy. My changes didn't go unnoticed by Liam. He saw the new exhaustion in my eyes, the growing distance between us. One evening, when I returned late from the studio, he was waiting for me in the living room of our suburban home. "What are you doing, Elena?" he asked, his voice edged with an unfamiliar annoyance. "Where are you going at night? Why are you refusing all of my mother's invitations?" I looked him straight in the eye, no longer flinching. "I'm working, Liam. I'm building something of my own, something no one can take away from me or belittle." He sighed, a sound of weary frustration. "You don't have to do this. I can take care of you and Aria." "Can you, Liam?" I shot back, my voice sharp. "You can provide for us, but can you protect us? On Christmas Eve, when our daughter was publicly humiliated, where were you?" He fell silent, and his silence, once again, was the only answer I needed. During those long, lonely months, there were times I felt on the verge of collapse. I'd question if my exhausting efforts were all in vain. Then one day, an email appeared in my inbox. It was from a woman who had bought one of my ceramic vases on Etsy. She wrote, "Dear Elena, I just wanted to tell you that your vase has brought so much light into my home. My husband recently passed away, and the house has felt so empty. But every time I look at this vase, with its beautiful, imperfect shape, I feel a spark of warmth, a little bit of hope. Thank you for creating something so meaningful." I read the email over and over, tears streaming down my face. But for the first time, they weren't tears of hurt. They were tears of validation. A complete stranger had seen the value in my work, a value that my own family, the family I had married into, would never ever understand. That night, I didn't go to the studio. I stayed home, sitting on the floor beside Arya's bed, just watching her sleep. I watched the peaceful rise and fall of her chest, her small hands still faintly smudged with paint. I realized then that this solitary path I was on, as difficult and lonely as it was the right one. It wasn't just about earning money or proving a point. It was about showing Arya that a person's worth isn't measured by their last name or their bank account, but by what they create with their own hands and heart. It was about being a role model of resilience. I couldn't change the Sterlings, but I could change my daughter's world. And for her, no matter how tired I was, I would keep walking. This path was mine, and I wouldn't let anyone turn me away from it. My resilience finally met its breaking point on a raw, rain-lashed Thursday night. I was trying to finish a large commission, a set of dinnerware that would finally put a respectable amount of money into my private savings account. But the old, cantankerous kiln in the corner of the studio sputtered, flickered, and then died completely. A week's worth of tireless work, of stolen hours and aching muscles, was now at risk of being ruined. Panic, followed by a wave of crushing exhaustion, washed over me. I slumped to the cold concrete floor, surrounded by my unfinished pottery, and for the first time in months, I cried. Not quiet, self-pitying tears, but a ragged, hopeless sob of pure helplessness. The rain beat against the windows, and I felt utterly, terrifyingly alone, fighting a battle no one even knew existed. In that moment of despair, the studio's creaky metal door groaned open. An older man with a kind face, a neatly trimmed silver beard, and gentle eyes stepped in, holding an umbrella. "I saw the light was still on," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "Are you all right, young lady?" It was Samuel Cohen, the owner of the studio. He was a retired potter who rented out the space to young artists for a pittance. Just to keep the fire of the craft alive, he'd once told me. I'd seen him a few times, but we'd never truly spoken. That night, he didn't ask a barrage of questions. He just took in the scene, my tear-streaked face, the silent kiln, with a quiet understanding. "All right, let's have a look," he said, his voice calm. "This old man still has a few tricks up his sleeve." He began to tinker with the kiln's ancient wiring, muttering technical terms I didn't understand. While he worked, he handed me a thermos. "My Rose made some ginger tea. Drink up, it'll warm your bones," he said. "There's no problem a hot cup of tea and a little patience can't solve." The warmth from the mug seeped into my numb fingers, spreading through my body and pushing back the cold, lonely dread. As Sam worked, we began to talk. I didn't mention the Sterlings by name. I simply spoke of the pressure to finish the order, of the exhaustion of balancing work and family. Sam listened intently, his eyes filled with an empathy that felt like a physical comfort. He told me about his own life, about his early struggles as a craftsman, and about how his wife, Rose, had always been his rock. After a while, he walked over to my work table and picked up one of my finished bowls. "You have a gift, Elena," he said, turning it over in his hands. "I can see it in the lines, in the weight of it. But remember this, talent isn't something you use to prove to someone else that you're good enough. It's a gift you share with the world." His words were a key unlocking a door in my soul I didn't even know was locked. For the first time, someone had told me my worth wasn't dependent on another's judgment. Sam fixed the kiln. He even showed me a new glazing technique he'd learned on a trip to Japan. He refused to take any money. Consider it an old man's investment in a young artist, he chuckled. When you make it big, just remember to help someone else along the way. From that night on, a special friendship blossomed. Sam became my mentor, my teacher. His wife, Rose, a warm, gracious Jewish woman with a smile that could light up a room, would often bring me homemade food, a container of her famous matzah ball soup, or a freshly baked challah bread. They began inviting Arya and me to their small home in Queens for Shabbat dinner on Friday nights. Their house was always filled with the smell of good food, laughter, and an uncomplicated love. They never asked about my in-laws, but they gave me the feeling of a real family, one I had been starving for. One Saturday, I brought Arya to the studio. She was immediately fascinated by the potter's wheel and the big blocks of clay. Sam, with infinite patience, sat down with her and showed her how to center a small lump of clay and shape it into a little bowl. He never acted condescending or treated it like a child's game. He spoke to her as a fellow artist. Arya, who was usually so shy around adults, became animated and curious. "Mr. Sam, can you teach me?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "I want to make a tea set for Mommy." Sam let out a hearty laugh that shook his whole body. "Of course, little artist. You come here whenever you like." Watching my daughter, her hands happily covered in mud, laughing with this kind man, I realized I'd found something far more precious than money or status. I had found my daughter a grandfather, someone who saw her light and nurtured it with genuine sincerity. That evening, on the drive back to our quiet, rented apartment, a place Liam rarely visited anymore, Arya asked a question from the back seat. "Mommy, why don't Grandma and Grandpa Sterling ever smile like Mr. Sam and Mrs. Rose?" Her innocent question pierced my heart, but this time the pain was different. It was clean, clarifying. I smiled into the rearview mirror. "Because everyone shows love in their own way, sweetie," I answered softly. "And we're very lucky that we found people who love us in the way we need to be loved." When we got home, I no longer felt the crushing weight of my solitude. I had a new family, a family not of blood, but of spirit. And in that moment, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul that no matter what happened next, we were going to be okay. The peace I had found with the Cohens lasted for a few precious months. My little pottery business on Etsy began to grow, each 5-star review a small affirmation of my worth. Arya lived for her weekends at Mr. Sam's studio. I had almost managed to forget the other world existed. Until a Tuesday afternoon, as I was grading my students' art projects, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar Manhattan number. I answered, and a smooth, cool voice I didn't recognize said, "Is this Elena? This is Mrs. Sterling's assistant." My heart seized. "Mrs. Sterling would like to invite you and your family to the Sterling Art Foundation's annual gala next Saturday. It is the most important event of the year. The attendance of Liam's family is mandatory." The word mandatory was delivered softly, but it landed with the weight of a stone. The shadow I had been running from was casting itself over me once more. The next day, a large, elegant box from Oscar de la Renta arrived at our door. Inside was a stunning evening gown for me and a matching dress for Arya, along with a handwritten card from Catherine. "Dearest Elena," it read on thick, creamy cardstock. "I know there have been misunderstandings lately. I hope this small gesture shows that you and Arya are always in my thoughts. Family is what matters most, and it is vital that we present a united front to the public. The success of the foundation is Liam's future and Arya's. I stared at the expensive dress. It wasn't a gift, it was a uniform, a tool to bribe me into compliance. Her words about family and a united front were so transparently false, they made me sick. She didn't care about us. She cared about the sterling image. She wanted Arya and me to be her beautiful, silent dolls, smiling on cue for her grand performance. That evening, Liam came home, a rare occurrence. He didn't come to reconnect. He came as his mother's emissary. "Mom called me," he said, avoiding my eyes. "This gala is incredibly important to her, Elena. Major donors will be there. Our family not showing up. It would create a lot of bad press." I placed Catherine's card on the coffee table between us. "So that's why you're here? To make sure the family puppets are all accounted for?" My voice was ice. "Can't you just do this?" he pleaded, his voice rising. "It's one night. Just smile and wave. Is it that hard? Can't you do it for me?" That phrase, for me, was a chokehold. Once again, I was the one who had to sacrifice, the one who had to endure. He never asked how I felt. He only cared about appeasing his mother and preserving the flawless facade of his family. I confided in Sam. I didn't go into the sordid details, only that I was being pressured to attend a family event I dreaded. He looked at me, his gaze steady and wise, and asked a simple question. "Will going bring you peace, Elena?" His question cut through all my confusion. I knew the answer was no, but I could also see the exhaustion in Liam's eyes, his own tormented conflict. A part of me, a foolish, stubborn part, still loved him, still wanted to salvage our marriage. Would refusing push him away for good? Was I being selfish? The shadow of guilt the Sterlings had so expertly cast over me for years began to creep back. I was caught between two worlds, the quiet peace I had fought so hard to find, and the hollow obligation of my marriage and the Sterling name. In the end, I made a decision. "All right, Liam," I told him over the phone, "we'll go." I could hear the relief in his exhale, but it wasn't a surrender. As I spoke, a plan began to form in my mind, a plan sparked by the words in his grandfather's will, the document I'd had my own lawyer quietly retrieve and analyze months ago. If they wanted me on their stage, fine. But this time, I wouldn't be a background player. I would arrive with my own script. I would wear their dress, eat their food, and smile for their cameras. But I would be carrying the truth with me, and I would wait for the perfect moment to bring the curtain down on their whole charade. On the day of the gala, I put on the Oscar de la Renta gown. It fit perfectly, as if it were made for me, but when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see myself. I saw a stranger, a Sterling creation. I applied my makeup carefully, a mask to hide the dark circles from sleepless nights. I coached Arya on how to smile and say please and thank you. "We're just going for a little while, sweetie," I told her. "Think of it like a play." Liam arrived to pick us up, handsome in a tailored tuxedo, but his eyes were anxious. "Thank you for doing this," he whispered. I simply smiled back, a smile I had practiced. It was the smile of someone holding a secret with the destructive power of a bomb. They wanted a performance. I would give them a performance they would never, ever forget. The grand atrium of the Museum of Modern Art was blinding, a galaxy of flashing camera bulbs and glittering diamond necklaces. I held Arya's hand tightly, feeling the faint tremor in her small fingers. Liam walked beside us, forcing a tight, practiced smile for the photographers. The moment we stepped inside, Catherine glided towards us, not to welcome us, but to inspect us. She adjusted Liam's bow tie, a proprietary gesture, then turned to me. She leaned in, Her voice a low whisper meant only for my ears, her perfume cloying and expensive. Try to avoid discussing your teaching job tonight, Elena. We wouldn't want the donors thinking the Sterling Foundation is associated with anything so pedestrian. Her words were an invisible slap. She wasn't just insulting me, she was dismissing my entire career, the children I taught, the life I had built for myself. I simply nodded, my own smile fixed in place. But deep inside, the kindling I had gathered over 10 years finally caught a spark. We were swept into a vortex of hollow social exchanges. People complimented my dress, but I knew they were only complimenting Catherine's taste and checkbook. A senator, a man whose face I recognized from the news, bent down to Arya. "And what do you want to be when you grow up, little one?" When she whispered, "An artist," he chuckled, a booming, dismissive sound. "That's lovely, but make sure you marry a banker." The group around him laughed. They treated my daughter's dream as a quaint joke, a frivolous pastime for women who didn't need to worry about money. I looked at Liam, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, anything to defend our child. He just smiled awkwardly, a man so accustomed to this world where everything was transactional that he no longer recognized its casual cruelty. The main event of the evening was the charity auction. Preston stood on stage, speaking eloquently about the Foundation's mission to bring art to the community. He then announced a new initiative. The Foundation would fund an art program for an underserved public school in the city. For a fleeting second, a foolish flicker of hope ignited in me. Perhaps they really did want to do some good. But then Preston continued, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. "And to kick off this wonderful program, we are honored to have our first donation. A collection of ceramic art created by my very own daughter-in-law, Elena Sterling. Let's start the bidding for this amateur collection at $50. A brief silence fell over the room, followed by a few scattered, polite titters. $50. He had turned my work, my passion, my late nights and aching back into a cheap, patronizing punchline on a stage. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I watched as images of my pottery, the pieces I had poured my soul into, were displayed on the large screens, cheapened by that pathetic starting bid. This wasn't an honor, it was a public execution of my worth. I turned my head to look at Liam. This time he wasn't silent. His face was a mask of shock and fury. He took a half step forward, his mouth opening to protest. But from the front row, Catherine turned. She gave him a look, a glacial stare so sharp and cold it could cut glass, followed by an almost imperceptible shake of her head. And Liam froze. He stopped. He took a step back, his face a battlefield of conflict, before it crumpled into resignation. That single silent exchange was the end. His hesitation, his ultimate submission to his mother, killed the last embers of love I had held for him. The line had been crossed. My vow of silence was finally, irrevocably, sealed by his cowardice. I didn't say a word. I stood up, ignoring the curious stares, and walked calmly towards the terrace. The cold New York night air hit my face, but it couldn't extinguish the inferno raging inside me. I pulled out my phone. My hands were no longer shaking. They were eerily steady. I dialed the number for David, my private lawyer, the one who had helped me research Liam's maternal grandfather's will. "David," I said, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "It's time I get everything ready. We're making our move at the Foundation's board meeting on Monday." There was a brief pause on the other end. "I understand, Elena," he replied, his tone all business. "Everything will be prepared." I hung up, staring down at the glittering river of traffic below. The play was over, and I would be the one to write the epilogue. When I returned to the ballroom, the charity auction for my pottery had concluded. A friend of Catherine's had purchased it for $200, a figure just high enough to save them from complete embarrassment. Liam rushed to my side. "Elena, I am so sorry. I had no idea Dad was going to do that." I cut him off by smiling, the brightest, widest smile I had managed all night. "It's all right, darling," I said, my voice so sweet it surprised even me. "It's for a good cause, isn't it?" I took his arm, leaning my head on his shoulder for the benefit of any watching eyes. I smiled, I mingled. I played the part of the supportive wife to perfection. But behind that smile, a warrior had been forged in the fires of their contempt. They had created their own worst enemy. And she was standing right beside them, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I left the gala alone, using the excuse that Arya was tired. Liam stayed behind, likely to soothe his parents' bruised egos. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room of our apartment, watching the city that never sleeps, but my mind was calmer and clearer than it had been in years. The white-hot rage from the night before had cooled, hardening into a steely resolve. There were no more tears, no more recriminations. There was only the plan. Early Saturday morning, I drove into Manhattan, not to the pottery studio, but to a small, discreet law office in Tribeca. David, my lawyer, a man in his 50s with shrewd, intelligent eyes, was already waiting. He didn't ask why I had suddenly changed my mind. He simply placed a cup of black coffee on the table in front of me and said, "All right, Elena, we have 48 hours. Tell me the plan." My weapon wasn't money or power in the way the Sterlings understood it. It was the truth, codified in a forgotten legal document. The last will and testament of Arthur Kensington, Catherine Sterling's father, Liam's maternal grandfather. David spread the certified copy across the conference table. "This is the kill shot," he said, pointing to a specific clause. Arthur, a true art patron who deeply distrusted his pragmatic son-in-law, had established the Sterling Foundation with a crucial binding provision. It stipulated that a 51% controlling interest in the foundation's board would always belong to a direct descendant of Kensington blood who is actively pursuing a career in the fine arts with genuine dedication. For years, Catherine had held this power, but the will also stated that should another descendant meet the criteria, the controlling interest could be legally transferred. "Liam has the bloodline, but he's a businessman," David explained, a glint in his eye. "You, Elena, are an artist and a teacher, and most importantly, so is Arya." "They'll say I'm an amateur," I stated flatly. "They just did last night." "Which is why we need proof," David countered. For the next 2 days, we worked relentlessly. I gathered everything: my fine arts degree from the University of Oregon, my teaching credentials, glowing performance reviews from my principal and parents, and local newspaper clippings about my school's art programs. I printed out every 5-star review and heartfelt thank you letter from my Etsy customers. David, meanwhile, drafted a meticulous legal brief, arguing that my work constituted a genuine career as defined by the will, not a mere hobby. Most critically, we had Arya's award-winning painting, the certificate from the citywide competition, and the written commendation from the judging panel, which included a respected art critic. Everything was organized, cross-referenced, and compiled into a thick, intimidating binder. "Your goal is not to argue with them in that meeting, Elena," David stressed, his tone firm. Your goal is to present an irrefutable legal case in front of the other board members and the Foundation's counsel. We will not engage in personal attacks. We will attack their power structure. The plan was surgically precise. As the wife of a board member, I had the right to attend the meeting. At the end, under other business, I would request the floor. I would distribute the binders, cite the clause in the will, and formally petition for the transfer of the 51% controlling interest to me as the legal guardian of the next genuine artist in the Kensington line, Arya Sterling. They will lose their minds, I said. David smiled faintly. Let them. The more composure they lose, the more unfit to lead they appear. You just stay calm and present the facts. On Sunday evening, Liam called, his voice thick with a hollow remorse. I talked to my parents. They said it was a bad idea. Mom wants to send you a gift to apologize. I don't want a gift, Liam, I said, my voice even. I just need you to answer one question. Tomorrow morning, in that board meeting, if I stand up and say something your parents don't like, whose side are you on? A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. Finally, a sigh. Elena, don't do anything foolish. You can't win against them. Just let it go. He still didn't get it. He thought I was throwing a tantrum. He didn't realize this was no longer about hurt feelings. This was a war. Okay, Liam, I said softly. I'll see you in the morning. I had given him his last chance to stand with me. He had refused. That night, for the first time in years, I slept soundly. All the anxiety, the fear, the internal conflict had vanished, replaced by a singular, clear objective. I was no longer Elena the victim. I was Elena the warrior, a mother protecting her daughter's future. On Monday morning, I chose my armor, a charcoal gray power suit, professional and commanding. I wore minimal makeup, just enough to conceal the traces of exhaustion and highlight the determination in my eyes. I looked at myself in the mirror, not as Liam Sterling's wife, but as Elena Hayes, an artist and a teacher. I picked up the thick binder. It was my weapon. I was ready. Whatever the outcome, I knew that after today, I would never live in their shadow again. I would be free. The heavy mahogany door to the Sterling Foundation's boardroom swung open. The scent of expensive leather and polished wood filled my nostrils. Around a long marble-topped table sat the most powerful faces in New York's art and finance scene. Preston was at the head, the chairman, with Catherine beside him, a silent queen. Liam sat opposite them, and his eyes met mine with a desperate, pleading look, a silent beg for me not to do anything reckless. I ignored it. I wasn't here as his wife. I was here as his adversary. I chose a chair at the far end of the table, quietly placing my briefcase beside me. I gave a polite, distant nod to the room. For the entire meeting, I said nothing. I just listened, observed, and waited. My silence made them uneasy. They weren't used to this calm, composed Elena. They were expecting an emotional outburst. They weren't going to get one. The meeting proceeded as usual. Financial reports, exhibition plans, and hollow self-congratulations. Finally, Preston tapped his pen on the table. If there is no other business, we can adjourn. That was my cue. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the solidness of the chair beneath me. Mr. Chairman, I said. My voice, clear and calm, sliced through the stale air, and the room fell instantly silent. I have one other matter I would like to present. Every head turned in my direction. Catherine's perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitted together in a flash of irritation. Preston looked annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, teacher?" he asked, his voice laced with his familiar, condescending tone. "I trust this isn't a personal matter." No, sir, I replied, looking him directly in the eye. This is a matter that pertains directly to the future and the integrity of the Sterling Foundation. I stood, opened my briefcase, and took out the meticulously prepared, binder-bound copies of my dossier. I would like to ask the Foundation's counsel, Mr. Byakolizawa Albright, to confirm the authenticity of this document. I slid one copy down the table to him and then distributed the others to each board member. This is a certified copy of the last will and testament of Mr. Arthur Kensington, the founder of this foundation. A murmur rippled through the room. Catherine's face went pale. Preston looked confused. He had clearly never bothered to read his father-in-law's will. I'd like to draw your attention to Article 4, Section B, I stated, my voice like steel. It stipulates that a 51% controlling interest of the Foundation's vote will always belong to a direct descendant of Kensington blood, who is actively pursuing a career in the fine arts with genuine dedication. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. For years, this power has been held by Mrs. Catherine Sterling. Today, however, I am here to petition for that control to be transferred. What did you say? Catherine shot up from her chair, her voice a sharp, venomous hiss. You, a public school teacher, you think you are a genuine artist? No, I replied calmly, and this was the fatal blow. I am not petitioning for myself. I am petitioning for the next heir in the Kensington line, one who has already proven her innate artistic talent and pure dedication. I am petitioning for Mr. Kensington's great-granddaughter. I am petitioning for my daughter, Arya Sterling. I placed Arya's award certificate and the letter of commendation from the art critic on the table. And as her mother and legal guardian, as per this provision, I will be the one to execute that controlling vote until she comes of age. The room held its breath. I glanced at Liam. His mouth was hanging open in utter disbelief. He had never known. Preston slammed his hand on the table. Absurd, this is a farce. But Mr. Albright, the counsel, after a moment of intense scrutiny, looked up, his expression grave. Mr. Chairman, based on my initial review of this certified document, Mrs. Hayes Sterling's petition appears to be legally sound. Catherine whipped her head from her husband to the lawyer, her face a contorted mask of rage and panic. This is impossible. My father would never... She stopped abruptly, a flicker of something dark crossing her face. And Liam, for the first time in his life, connected the dots. He stared at his mother, his voice trembling with a dawning horror. You knew about this clause, didn't you? He asked, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. You've always known. That's why you've always belittled Elena's talent, always tried to push Arya away from art. You were afraid. You hid it. The indictment from her own son was the final dagger. Catherine's regal composure shattered. She sank back into her chair, gasping for air. I looked directly at Preston and Catherine, the two people who had made me feel so small and worthless for a decade. Now they were the ones who looked pathetic. As of today, I announced, my voice resonating in the stunned silence, the Sterling Foundation will operate according to the true vision of its founder. A vision of nurturing genuine art, not of serving anyone's personal vanity or social standing. I gathered my papers, not waiting for a response. I trust my lawyer and Mr. Albright will work to finalize the transfer. Gentleman, lady. I turned and walked toward the door, my back straight. I did not look back. I could hear Preston shouting, a strangled, guttural sound. I could hear Catherine's broken sobs, and I could hear Liam desperately calling my name. But I didn't stop. The play was over, and a new chapter of my life had just begun. The moment I stepped out of the skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, the humid city air hit my face, but to me, it felt as clean and fresh as the mountain air of my native Oregon. I didn't hail a cab. I wanted to walk. I wanted to feel the solid pavement beneath my feet. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful that my legs trembled, and I had to lean against the cold granite of a building to steady myself. I had done it. I had faced my demons, and I had won. But victory didn't taste as sweet as I'd imagined. It tasted of exhaustion and of a profound, aching sadness for what was lost. A family I had once tried so desperately to be a part of. A husband I had once loved with all my heart. I stood there amidst the rushing crowds, an anonymous face in the city, but for the first time in 10 years I felt completely, wholly, and freely myself. Then my phone began to buzz incessantly, a hornet's nest of fury. The first call was from Preston. I answered. "What have you done?" he roared, his voice cracking with rage. "You've destroyed everything. I'll sue you. I'll see to it that you don't have a penny to your name." I listened silently until his tirade ran out of steam. Then I replied calmly, "You can speak to my lawyer, Mr. Sterling. Goodbye." I hung up. Next was Isabel, her voice dripping with venom. "Who do you think you are? You're nothing but a gold digger. This family will never accept you now." Click. The last call was from Catherine. The shouting was gone, replaced by a trembling, tear-filled voice. "Elena, please, don't do this to our family. Liam won't be able to bear it." She was using her son as a final, desperate shield. I took a deep breath. You should have thought about family when you were humiliating your 8-year-old granddaughter, Mrs. Sterling. I ended the call and powered my phone off. The storm had passed. That night, Liam showed up at my apartment. He looked ravaged, his eyes red-rimmed. "Elena," he began, "I don't know what to say. I'm in shock. I'm furious with my mother, but you shouldn't have done this." "Shouldn't have?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "I gave you 10 years, Liam. 10 years to choose, to stand with me and our daughter. And every single time you chose them. In that boardroom today, I gave you one last chance, and you chose silence." He looked down at the floor, a pathetic figure. "I love you, Elena. I love Arya." "I know," I replied, and a sudden wave of sorrow washed over me. "But your love isn't enough. It's not enough to protect us. So now you have to choose, Liam. It's them or it's us. There is no middle ground anymore. If you choose them, sign the divorce papers my lawyer will be sending. If you choose us, you have to prove it. You have to build a new life with me, far away from their shadow." I didn't wait for his answer. I drove to Queens, to the small, warm home of Sam and Rose. I didn't have to say much. They looked into my eyes and understood everything. Rose enveloped me in a hug, a real mother's hug that smelled of cinnamon and comfort. "You did the right thing, my dear," she whispered. Sam made me a cup of tea, and we sat in a comfortable silence. Their silence was nothing like Liam's. It wasn't weakness or avoidance. It was presence. It was unconditional support. "I don't know what to do next," I confessed into the quiet. Sam placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You will," he said. "You're stronger than you think. For now, just rest. You're safe here." That night, Arya and I stayed with them. For the first time, my daughter slept soundly in a home free of invisible tensions. And I realized family isn't where you are born. It's where you are healed. The next morning, I performed a symbolic act. I packed up the lavish Oscar de la Renta gown and my charity pottery. and I paid for a courier service to send it all straight back to the Sterling estate. I included a short, simple note. "Thank you for the gifts. I no longer have need of them. I have my own." It was my final declaration. I was returning their uniform, returning their pity. I was no longer an item in their collection. I called my principal and requested a week's leave of absence. I needed time to breathe, time to be with my daughter, and time to decide what my new dawn would look like. I had won back my power, but now the bigger question loomed. What was I going to do with it? Just before I could turn my phone off again, a text message from an unknown number came through. "Elena, it's Nicholas. I was in the boardroom yesterday. I just wanted to say, what you did was incredibly brave. If you ever need any help, don't hesitate to call me." The message stunned me. Nicholas, the quiet, compliant cousin, was the only Sterling to reach out not with threats or pleas, but with admiration. A tiny seed of hope sprouted within me. Maybe the entire family tree wasn't rotten to the core. Maybe in the ashes of the Sterling Empire, a few embers of decency remained. I saved his number. I didn't reply yet, but I knew with a small measure of relief that I wasn't as alone in this fight as I had thought. A year later, I no longer breathed the humid, heavy air of New York. Instead, my lungs filled with the crisp, dry desert air of Santa Fe, New Mexico. The sunlight here is different, a warm, honey-colored light that pours over the adobe-style home I bought with my own savings and the first dividends from the Sterling Foundation. The power I had won, I didn't use it for revenge. I used it to build. Following Arthur Kensington's true vision, I had restructured the foundation, cutting its frivolous projects and refocusing its vast resources on grants for talented, undiscovered young artists and funding for public school art programs across the country. I ran it from a distance through a new board of directors I had appointed, which included Nicholas. I was no longer just a teacher. I had become a patron of the arts on my own terms. Behind our home, there is a small, sun-drenched pottery studio where I still spend time every day, my hands in the clay. It's no longer a hustle, it's a meditation. My pieces are no longer sold on Etsy. They are displayed in local Santa Fe galleries where art is cherished for its soul, not its social currency. Arya, now 9, is thriving. She loves her new school, a place where creativity is encouraged as much as academics. She has friends, carefree children who don't care about her last name. And in the sturdy cottonwood tree in our backyard, there is a treehouse we built together. It is her fortress, her own private world, safe and full of color. Her award-winning painting hangs in the most prominent spot in our living room. I still hear news of the Sterlings through Nicholas. The empire didn't crumble, but it lost its soul. Preston, after losing control of the foundation, retreated from public life, growing bitter and old in his empty mansion. Catherine tried to reach out a few times, letters filled with a late-blooming, self-serving remorse. I read them, but I never replied. Forgiveness is a long journey, and I am not there yet. Isabel and her senator husband have separated. Their marriage, built on power and image, couldn't survive the family's fall from grace. Nicholas left the family firm and opened a small, independent gallery in Brooklyn, dedicated to promoting young artists. He and I still talk occasionally, an unlikely alliance forged in respect. And Liam, he never signed the divorce papers. Instead, he did something I never expected. He resigned from the Sterling Foundation, sold his penthouse in Manhattan, and moved to Santa Fe. He doesn't live with us. He rents a small casita in town and teaches an art history class at the local community college. He doesn't ask for forgiveness, he just acts. He picks Arya up from school every day. He spends his weekends helping me tend to the garden. He attends every one of Arya's school art shows. He is using his actions, not his words, to prove that he has chosen us. Our relationship is complicated, a slow and careful reconstruction, built one brick of trust at a time. I don't know what the future holds for us, but for the first time, I see a real man, not a boy living in the shadow of his mother. A few months ago, while restructuring the Foundation's archives, David found something Catherine had hidden away. A personal letter from Arthur Kensington, addressed to the future great-grandchild who would inherit his artistic vision. To my dearest grandchild, he wrote, "If you are reading this, it means the world has changed, and perhaps my family has too. I leave you not just money, but a responsibility to protect art from arrogance and commerce. Trust in the value of what is authentic, and never let anyone tell you your passion is worthless. Your love for art is my truest legacy." Reading his words, I wept. I wept for the man I never met, who understood me better than anyone. I hadn't been alone in my fight. I was simply finishing the mission he had started. The story ends on a Sunday morning. The three of us, me, Arya, and Liam, are having breakfast on the patio, looking out at the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, which are blushing pink in the early morning light. There's no fancy catering, just blueberry pancakes and hot coffee. Arya is chattering excitedly about her new sculpture project at school. Liam is listening, his eyes shining with an undisguised pride. There is no tension, no barbs, no unspoken resentments. There is only peace. My phone rings. It's Sam and Rose on a video call, checking in. We talk and laugh like a real family. After I hang up, Liam looks at me. "Thank you, Elena," he says quietly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I smile, a real easy smile. "I didn't give up on you, Liam. I gave up on the shadow that was covering you. Welcome back to the light. And as the sun rises higher, flooding the valley with warmth, I know this is my legacy. Not power, not money, but this peace. A sunrise I made for myself, my journey from a silent wife to a woman who created her own sunrise, taught me that our truest legacy isn't what we inherit, but the peace we build for ourselves. If my story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to fight to find your own light in the darkness, I would be so honored to hear about a lesson you've learned on your own path in the comments below. Your story could be the spark of hope that someone else needs to see today. Thank you for walking this path with me. Please like this video if it touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to join our community for more stories of resilience and healing. You are not alone.